freedom, free speech, etc., etc. It just so happens that Rappler was trashed into the limelight hanggang ngayon, but still it's a matter really of, of, of everybody's issue, not only of the media, the public as well, and all other stakeholders in the community.
Okay.
As a starting point.
All right. Coming from the NUJP, how do you look at it? Mr. Nonoy?
Yes, thank you. I mean, this government, the president, for that matter, started off on the wrong foot. One of his very first press conferences, what did he say? These journalists who were murdered deserved what they got because they're corrupt. So he laid down the premise already. He already laid down the premise that if something happens to you, it's probably because you're corrupt. It was a blanket indictment without any proof presented. And under a year and a half under Duterte, we've already lost 6 journalists, which is a record equal, the rate is about equal to Aquino's and Gloria's average. So there's really nothing to celebrate in terms of, and the threat levels actually, the threat levels right now are spiking. We have not seen this this level of intimidation, of harassment, of threats ever before. I mean, on social media, physically, through text, we get reports of colleagues receiving text messages. We get reports of their private, their messengers being flooded with threats, you know, all this. And it's bound, thankfully, the great majority have not buckled down. You know, we're still going strong, and like NUJP has asserted ever since, the Philippine press is not free because we are allowed to be free. We are free because we insist that we're free.
Do you see telltale signs that there would be something more sinister in the near future?
Definitely. I mean, Rappler is a start. And the threats have been coming on. I mean, if the president threatens, that is more than a threat. It's just one step from actually happening. So it's happened to Rappler. He's threatened ABS-CBN. And in fact, come to think of it, if not for immunity from suit, he could be sued for blackmail. I mean, areglo tayo, basta support federalism. That's blackmail, pure and simple. So how do you protect yourself from
Okay.
someone like that? Diba?
All right. What's written in the books, Professor, coming from an academician's point of view?
Of course, there's consistency with regard to what's written in the books because if you read Ed Budlambet's book titled Committed Journalism, I'm sure they've read it already, one of the principles of journalism is freedom. And it's clearly stated there that in the absence of freedom, it is the journalist's responsibility to fight for freedom, to fight for the restoration of it. So in periods of distress, the irony there is that this is the best time to be a journalist. And that's the irony. Way back in martial law, for example, you can say that some textbooks have mentioned the golden age of journalism because there were journalists, while there were those who sold out to the system and became part of the crony press, no offense meant to some of those who may have worked for the crony press, but there are still journalists who held the line, who stood their ground to make sure that the truth will come out, even if the government, the Marcos administration at that time would suppress the truth. And how did they do it? It bears recalling at this particular time because while I agree with Nonoy Espina's viewpoint that the worst is yet to come, what will happen to those who, to the truth seekers out there among journalists, among the journalists that we have right now, is that it's either they go to the alternative press, they become part of what used to be called the mosquito press. Some of them would decide to go underground to join the revolutionary movement so that they would become part of the alternative publications of various revolutionary movements here. That's the history of the press right now. And I think I should also add, aside from what my friends Ariel and Nonoy said a while ago regarding the harassment and intimidation that's being done against the dominant media, even the alternative media are not spared from the threats. We know of the case of Kat Cortez, who's based in Mindanao, who has been receiving death threats. She works for Radio Niwan, okay, which is a progressive radio station. There's also the case of Sherwin De Vera, who's a columnist of Northern Dispatch, who is also at the receiving end of various death threats. So we have that kind of atmosphere right now. And of course, we cannot dismiss online threats, online cyberbullying. And we are more concerned with female journalists who are being threatened online because aside from the death threats that they get, they're threatened with rape, bodily harm, among others. I won't mention specific names of female journalists, but in my ongoing thesis on culture of impunity, I've learned that some female journalists have decided to hire bodyguards. Some of them decided to fortify their homes without giving any details. I'm sorry, but you know how to fortify certain homes, right? But they did that. These are concrete indications. These are specific cases, no matter how anecdotal they may be, that the threats are real. It's not just online, okay? It translates to how you comport yourself as a journalist in real life. And you can only imagine, just to mention a specific name, what Pia Ranyada goes through every time she goes to Malacanang because of the brazen attitude of the president where he is not afraid or he doesn't have any, second thoughts about calling out Rappler for allegedly peddling fake news. So there is an impact on journalists whenever you're called out, whenever you're scolded in full view of the public and in full view of your colleagues. So yeah, the public humiliation is immeasurable. It's unprecedented for Duterte to do that. Can Duterte criticize the media? Of course he can. But he has to do it constructively, not destructively. And that's what he's trying to do with Rappler and other media organizations.
Professor, do you see any similarity with his American counterpart?
Yeah, definitely. Because that American counterpart, whom will hide under the name of Donald, would have the attitude of branding those critical of his administration, like CNN, ABC, NBC, as fake news. So actually, Duterte and Trump have something in common in the sense that they use fake news quite a lot. But it's not the academic definition of fake news, because if you look at the study in Stanford University, what is the definition of fake news? It is deliberate misleading of facts, or misinformation and disinformation. Yeah, so there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. So that's the academic definition. But for Trump and Duterte, they have a common definition of fake news: anything that is critical of their administration. So I think that's what's common.
Yeah. Given such a situation, will we still have young journalists in the future? Would we still have provincial newspapers will become members of
me?
PPI?
No, I've been talking to a lot of college
Closer to
students.
the microphone, please.
Yeah, even if when we go do our caravan roadshows on fake news or against fake news, pare-parang sinasabi nila. And these are aspiring journalists wanting to have a career in journalism or in the media industry. But when I ask them, kaya niyo pa ba? Meron ba kayong the balls and the goals to be one in the future? Merong hesitation. I'm not saying it's because it's the atmosphere today, but even before, meron ng konting because of the killings, harassments, and I think they're actually rethinking their priorities or even rethinking about their career in the future. But I think we also got lots of journalism students, yung graduating really wanting to be in the journalism profession. I mean, may I just say about government, speaking of any government for that matter, will not be friendly to a critical press. But any well-meaning government should welcome a critical press. And that's what democracy is all about.
So you mean to say that's what's lacking in this administration?
And, welcoming the goodwill. No, I'm not saying they should be friendly, but they should welcome a critical press. Only because of the checks and balances that the media providers was as watchdog.
So-
Kung wala yun I mean, what about the public's right to information, uh, to be able to know anomalies and even corruption, etc., kung walang media, kung walang critical press? We cannot say to a government that yes at yes na lang tayo
Okay.
and be blinded about all these realities.
Nonay, could it be possible that people in government would kill literally and figuratively media practitioners and media entities? Because while they may not opt to kill the journalists, they may opt to kill the establishment. How do you look at it?
You know, even from the time of Gloria, Aquino, now Duterte, almost I think every president's fondest dream is to see media silenced. Even Aquino. Even Aquino bashed media a lot. Diba? And Gloria did try during her national emergency declaration. She sent troops to ABS-CBN and she raided, the police raided the Tribune. And right now, I think of all of them, after Marcos, it is this president that actually is taking an active policy of shutting down the critical press.
So, you see telltale signs that Rappler, ABS, and Inquirer will not be in the same boat. They will have more of the same.
Hopefully they'll push back, like Rappler is doing now. It's pushing back, which is a good thing. And kaya nga, it's also crucial in times like this. Of course, we all compete with each other. Pero the bottom line is, we let one of us go down. Believe me, one of us goes down and we do nothing, eventually all of us go down.
Okay. Much to our desire to discuss the Rappler thing, we have no lawyer here. But why do you think the Rappler issue is just the beginning? Why?
Well, Rappler is not necessarily the beginning of the threat and intimidation, as correctly noted by Nonoy. But it is the first in the sense that it is the one that is being actively harassed and intimidated. Maybe we can say it along that line, especially with the use of legal mechanisms through the SEC decision to revoke the license. No one saw it coming. Although we already had suspicions when the Office of the Solicitor General, as early as December 2016, decided to file a complaint, which makes you wonder, what is it with the Solicitor General that would motivate him to file that particular complaint about specifically the PDRs of North Base and Omidyar Network? And please try to remember that if we look at the sequencing of events, after that complaint that was filed at the SEC, in the State of the Nation address last July 2017, Duterte went on the offensive to call out three media organizations, news media organizations, including Rappler, and the accusation against Rappler is that it is foreign-owned. So in that sense, we can see that it was the first to be victimized, although you can also counter-argue that the Philippine Daily Inquirer's case happened way before the SEC decision, which was just last week, because in the case of the Philippine Daily Inquirer, it was a little bit more creative. The Prietos and the Rufinos were forced to sell to arrange the sale of their stake in the Inquirer group of publications to an ally of Duterte who happens to be Ramon Ang. So we're seeing we're seeing the threats right now. And of course, we don't discount what's happening right now to ABS-CBN because it faces, a case of estafa for allegedly failing to air campaign advertisement during the elections. And of course, the franchise is still up in the air. GMA's franchise, I understand, has been renewed already, but for ABS-CBN, it's still hanging in the air. So these are the threats right now, and the administration is being not just creative in its, harassment and intimidation of the news media entities. You're not just killing journalists, as mentioned by Ariel. The statistics is clear. The statistics are clear, but the threats, the killing or the destruction of selected news media entities are very much evident.
For the record, where does PPI get its money?
Membership.
Membership.
Tsaka, PPI relies on sort of independent funders to be able to mount or produce training programs because that's what we do. Training journalists since 1964. So we've been transparent about it. If you look at our Facebook and website, and just so people would know in the public as well that every media entity and even a media worker should have accountability. When you go forthcoming, only because you love your job, you're passionate about, and you're honest about in your dealings, right? As an organization, we've been transparent, accountable with what we do and what we get from. We don't earn technically because we're non-stock non-profit
Okay.
for accountability. And may just say about while I may agree that the Rappler issue is not representative of the media industry, there is a collective sentiment when it comes to separating legality and press freedom. Legality should not be used to muzzle press freedom. Yun kasi yung binabanggit na kung sino man yun, na hindi, dapat ganito din kayo eh. You cannot be operating illegally, parang ganon. So there's an accusation already that that Rappler has towed the line, meaning, there's a little lapses. But, what they did for PLDT, they given PLDT 1 year to be answerable. And they should let Rappler answer their lapses. Pero, in a considerable time. Hindi yung pwedeng, ito lang, o tapos na, wala ka ng time. I mean, that's not the way to,
Okay. All right.
that is not due process, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Yes, Nonoy.
To add just a bit,
Yung tanong ko muna, where does NUJP get the money?
we have
Wala kayong pera, sabihin mo.
yeah, we don't generate our own money except from membership fees, But
Dahil alam ko kasi, yung mga api at walang kinikita, yun ang member ng NUJP.
Yeah.
O, tama, right? So, pag may diniklara ng pera, may problema.
sama na ako doon.
O, yun na nga eh.
Hindi, we do get project funds from fellow journalist unions overseas. We're an affiliate of the International Federation of Journalists. So a lot of the member unions also support us. Especially we have the scholarship for the children of slain journalists. That includes the children of the Maguindanao, the Ampatuan massacre victims. Marami na tayong pinagraduate. We've graduated college.
Nonoy, for the record, legitimate children.
Not just.
Not just.
Basta recognize the children.
Okay.
Inclusive kasi.
Inclusive. Yeah. We are
Inclusive. Okay. At least that's for the record, no?
No, in fact, we have cases where we actually support 2 sets of children.
Okay.
So, I mean,
both pro-life and prolific, no? Okay.
But to add just a bit to what Ariel was saying earlier, I do wish Harry Roque was here, because I would call him out on his prejudgment of Rappler. I mean, he called them. They can go back to being bloggers. They are not bloggers, my God. These are journalists.
And he should be the last person
He
to
should
say
be
that.
the last person to say that, coming from the background that he claims to have built his name on. That was an insult to journalists. Because
Okay.
we do not become bloggers when we stop being journalists. Di ba? So, and what does he think of bloggers? Lesser creatures? There are a lot of outstanding bloggers out there. So you don't become just a blogger. You don't return to being just a blogger. I would call him out on that.
Okay. We have questions from the floor. Let's start with our friend from... yes, please. Please. There's a microphone there. Please identify yourself and the entity you come from.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. My name is Alden Monzon from the Japanese news agency Kyodo News. I just have a specific question about the Rappler case and the SEC ruling. Do you at least see some merit in the decision of the SEC, because it did mention that Rappler committed error when it comes to the provision that gave a degree of control to their investments. Um, uh, Even though various media groups like the NUJP, the Foreign Correspondents, and the Economic Journalists Association did issue statements of public support to Rappler, they did not discuss the particular provision which conferred a degree of control. So do you at least see merit in that? And okay, go ahead, sir.
Okay, SEC has to do its job. When it does, dapat tingnan nila lahat. Not to, um, um, look into Rappler and look into the others as well. If it's well-meaning, then it should do that. I personally see merit, and I don't know with the others, I see merit because just like any business, really, SEC will have to look into it. But there's a thin line between doing your business, as Raptor does, because it is a profiteering news media, multimedia news organization, between its being a business entity and also as a media entity. I mean, functioning and churning journalism products and news and what have not. But I think SEC should not overstretch it as really muscling it up. And I think that is the problem. Kasi hindi nakitaan ng SEC na yun yung magiging chilling effect eh. And I think hindi lang chilling effect in all of the media entities or other media entities, but other businesses as well. And it's a wake-up call to other business or other businesses to also do the same, to be prudent, to be forthcoming, to really do good business. And that's what SEC should be doing and should be alerting us.
Okay.
So for PPI, sir, it's a matter of selective justice. Not, I mean, you're not saying that the ruling itself is wrong.
No. Our position, don't get me wrong, our position, because that's why, that's where my orientation is also. Our institutional position in PPI is that it is a matter of press freedom, nothing else. We do not discuss, kasi, that's the business side of it. And we have nothing to do with it. That's the thing here, because PPI is a media organization operating not as a business entity, but as a press organization or media organization. So we don't look into the business side of it, but we look into more. Because ang issue ng legality na yun, maliit lang yun eh. As compared to napakalaking bagay about press freedom. And that's, I think, the issue. Yung iba kasi, others are saying, no, it's more of the legal matter or legal side of how Raptor does it. Hindi yun eh. That's only one aspect of it.
Can we hear from the NUJP, sir?
Sure.
Sige, okay, the way we see it, well, I don't want to discuss the, I'm no lawyer. I hate discussing these decisions because actually I get dizzy reading these documents. Pero no, to be frank about it, okay, granted if Rappler may have committed a mistake, but did it actually commit what was stated in the PDR? Na actually did Omidyar actually exercise its prerogative or power to veto something that Rappler wanted to do? Wala pa naman ata eh. I don't think it has, no? And besides, typically, as I understand it, SEC normally gives a business time to correct itself. In this case, wala. They just came out with a decision and said, that's it.
PLDT nga 1 year.
Oh.
Okay. The point here is, from what I understand, is that SEC could have given Rappler time to comply with the requirements. Because I also talked with some former SEC officials who said, for a company who may have erred they will be given a show cause order or probably a suspension. And then there's a time you revoke everything.
Yeah.
From the academician's point of view. You
Well-
find it irregular?
Yeah, there is, well, irregular in the sense that you have certain premise. Just for the record, I've read the entire 29 pages of the SEC ruling. So what happens here is that you're correct in saying that what the SEC questioned, among many other major issues, was why Omidyar Network was given that prior good faith discussion provision, wherein Rappler would have to consult with Omidyar Network as regards any planned revisions to the articles of incorporation. So if we look at the wording of the PDR itself, based on what was quoted by the 29-page SEC decision, what is stated there is just simply the need to consult with Omidyar. Ipadaan nyo muna sa amin ito. Okay? Now, there is no specific provision that states that Omidyar will interfere with the management, most especially the editorial aspect of the operations of Rappler. So this is important. Why? Because the main accusation against Rappler is that it violates the provision which pertains to 100% ownership and management of media. Okay? So the keywords here would be ownership and management. So that's one. Now, of course, you can say, well, as far as the opinion of the SEC is concerned, this is a management issue. Okay, granted, just for the sake of argument, as Nonay said, that Rappler may have erred in providing that provision to Omidyar. Because if you look at the PDR of North Base, there's no such prior good faith discussion proviso. Okay, maybe they have erred. But what did the SEC do? Okay? Now, as stated by Melo, show cause order dapat. So there was show cause order that was made months before the SEC made that final ruling. And I would like to guess that the show cause order was one of the bases for the SEC decision. But as correctly noted again by Melo, it would have to go through a process of giving time to make certain corrections to whatever infirmities. But they hastened it. There was no suspension of Rappler. It was an immediate revocation. So as far as the content is concerned, yes, you can grant for the sake of argument. And actually, I'm curious as to why Omidyar had that particular provision. My guess is that it's because they invested something like $1 million, or which is no laughing matter as far as we're concerned. But nevertheless, the SEC was quite haphazard in its decision. And of course, the debate here is whether or not the PDR proviso on prior good faith discussion constitutes a violation of the Constitution. Now, my point of view, and that this is what's shared by those who joined the Black Friday protest, by many of those who joined the Black Friday protest movement, was that there is no constitutional violation. Don't get me wrong. Supporting Rappler doesn't mean that you are in favor of foreign mass media ownership. Those are two different issues. Personally, I am against foreign media ownership, and I will be the first to call out Rappler if they did something wrong, okay? But upon reading the SEC decision, it was just, a prior good faith discussion that is stated there, which should not be misinterpreted as management. I'm not using the framework of the law, because as a journalist, I am trained to observe and to use the framework of the highest normative standards of journalism. And that is one reason why, as a teacher, a journalism educator, I tried my best, and we've succeeded in one way or the other, to separate the teaching of law and ethics. Because you cannot have law and ethics as one course. Why? Because you will be interpreting ethics within the framework of the law. And that's not what journalism is all about. Responsible journalism is not just simply compliance with the law, contrary to what one particular media organization would argue. So, this
You're
is
not
the case
referring
right
to the
now.
National Press Club.
I am referring to the National Press Club. So that's the problem with media organizations like the NPC. I'm sorry if we're veering away from our discussion. I apologize for that. But this is very important. because there is no textbook in journalism that would tell you that that journalism is all about following the law. The only reference that I can think of would be Today's Revolution Democracy, which was written by Ferdinand Marcos, although there are rumors that it was ghostwritten by someone else. Because what did Gregorio Sendanyet say about development communication or development journalism? It would have to be journalism that is supportive of official development goals. So that gave the theoretical framework for the crony press at that time. But we all know that Sendanya is now irrelevant and that Marcos is, that the Marcosian rule was very repressive. So that's the only reference we can find. So to the National Press Club, I think the challenge here is your framework, is your basis for saying that responsible journalism should be compliant with the law, is it based on Today's Revolution Democracy by Marcos? Or are you just simply parroting what Vitaliano Aguirre said earlier, the Justice Secretary? I apologize if we veered away from the discussion.
I have another question for the local press groups. How do you view the use of PDRs by other media organizations like ABS-CBN and GMA when they have PDRs, which, if I remember correctly, are publicly listed, so they are tantamount to shares in the company, which could be legally equal to part ownership of their companies. Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think that this media organizations should start self-correction when it comes to these procedures on investments?
Yeah, it's a very legitimate question because before he became a member of FOCAP, he was a business reporter and he knows what he's talking about. Yes, please.
Short lang to. From what I heard from a reliable ABS-CBN insider, the term was they use solid. They have solid PDRs. I don't think what that means. I'm not sure. But it cannot be they cannot be destroyed. I mean, insofar as PDRs are concerned, because from what I heard also, a lot of media companies have been using PDRs ever since, and these are approved by SEC, and they know that very well. I don't know what the other.
Yes, please.
I guess that would be arguable. You could argue that, it could be tantamount to part ownership. But SEC allowed it. The government's allowed it. It's apparently it's legal.
It's a practice.
So kaya nga, it's a practice. I mean, and it's not media. It's not just media. It's a business proposition. It's just like, you may not be in favor of some practices, but they're legal.
Yes, please.
Mabilis lang po. I think that's one of the basic problems with corporate media because sometimes we go into hair-splitting arguments as to what constitutes shares of stock. Now, we might have differences of opinion here, but I'm coming from, forgive me, from my 7 years working for Ibon Data Bank or Ibon Foundation. I was editor-in-chief prior to, venturing into journalism education. Now, from what I recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong because you're the business reporter here, PDRs are financial instruments where you invite foreigners to infuse money into your business. So in Rappler, whether it's the case of Rappler, ABS, GMA, PLDT, or any other publicly listed companies, Rappler pala isn't publicly listed, let's be clear on that. So, and the PDRs issued by Rappler are among just a selected group of investors. Hindi yan publicly offered talaga, unlike ABS-CBN and GMA. Now, PDRs do not necessarily translate to getting, specific shares of stock from the company where you invested in. So in other words, if we want to be a bit, popular in terms of translating what PDRs mean, it's allowing foreign investors a mechanism to infuse money and hopefully what's in it for them, if the company earns substantially, then they will be getting dividends from whatever it is that they infused from their quote-unquote investment. But it doesn't translate to shares of stock because as you know, shares of stock could be two things locally, okay? So there's such a thing as shares of stock where you don't get that much dividend, but you get a seat in the board of directors. But there are shares of stock where you don't necessarily get a seat in the board of directors, but you get certain dividends upon, depending on the number of shares that you have. PDRs would be a different animal altogether in the sense that it's just simply the dividends that we're talking about. Yeah. That is why it is a legitimate question. Going back to Umidyar, you raised a very valid question. Why is it that there is a need for prior good faith discussion? That's a very legitimate question if you want to be objective about it. But then again, does the punishment fit the crime? Was that perceived quote-unquote error tantamount to closure of Rappler? When in fact, it's just a provision that would have to be corrected.
Okay, so that is what makes this issue more controversial. Okay, but mind you, during the 90s, I asked someone about a foreigner infusing money into the Philippines. I asked, isn't this money laundering? And the answer given me by somebody in government was very simple. It's what you call foreign direct investment. So an FDI can be money laundering, and money laundering could be FDIs. So in the same manner as freedom fighters could be terrorists for some, as the other way around. Questions from the floor. Do I see Jason thinking of asking a question? Jason? So far? Yes, please, please.
Thinking of something to write already.
No, I guess I'm just going to ask, what's the next step for us? Since Nono, you already said earlier, it might be just the first step. So,
Siguro, I think the challenge is, for media in general is getting the people on our side. I mean, we have to admit, we haven't had much public sympathy for our causes, not even for media killings. There has not, except probably for the massacre, there has not been any substantial amount of outrage from the public. And then if there is, it's still subject to the news cycle, and even we are subject to our news cycles. We play it up now, and then after the news cycle subsides, we go to the next story, which is unfortunate. But I think what is important right now is for us to close ranks, really, to close ranks. I mean, like I was saying earlier, we let Rappler go down, sooner or later we all go down. And just as important, after we close ranks, let us engage our audiences, let us engage our publics. Let us. I think what we have forgotten in large part is to educate our people on what exactly our role is. As we'd like to say sa NUJP, we do not own, we the media, we the journalists, we do not own press freedom. It is a freedom enjoyed by the people through us. We only serve their right to know. No, we do not own press freedom. So we have to let them understand that. And that's the only way that we'll get them on our side. Although eventually, I think, in the same way it happened during martial law, eventually when repression comes in and voices start being silenced, people are going to look for those voices. And then that is when they realize that they will have to stand up also. So yun lang, we just have to remain firm and continue lang.
yeah, can I follow up on that? You said there's no substantial amount of outrage. Can I get your idea, or can I pick your mind on that a little bit? Why do you think that there is no substantial amount of anger?
I think it's partly our fault also. Like we're fond of, it's an industry joke. Mayayabang tayo. Di ba? No. A lot of us, admittedly, we have our high horse. No. A lot of us forget that we think we're better than the average person, than the people we serve. I mean, I think it goes with the territory then sometimes. But I think we have to disabuse of that, ourselves of that now. No? We just have to go back to what exactly are we here for? We're here to serve the people. We are no different. Kaya nga, even there have been a lot of, politicians are fond of courting us by proposing that they're gonna craft laws for media. And we always insist, no, we are not a special sector. We are just like everyone else. We should be enjoying the same rights and the same freedoms as everyone else. We shouldn't be enjoying any more or any less. And I think that is what we have to remember also, that we are no better than anyone else.
Yes, please.
Can I just go back to your first question of what's next? Whatever happens to us or to the media industry, we're partly to be blamed or to blame for this. We have to step up. If we've been accused of being unethical, then let's show them we're not. If we have been accused of not being credible, then let's show them we're credible. And closing ranks, as Nonoy said, and also, also time to do an introspection. I mean, you said that we are not a special lot, for sure. But I think for the longest time, we've been doing our functions and duties parang tayo-tayo lang. I think the public engagement, public involvement has to be there. Because at the end of the day, truth, loyalty to truth and loyalty to public, whatever power that any journalist has that doesn't come from a pen, it emanates from the public. When you have the public on your side, I think that goes for not keeping issues unto yourselves because it's entirely a public domain. And you cannot separate public media accountability from public engagement. There are dynamics and then there are even dialectics. So I think we have to rethink our values as well. And at the end of the day, journalism today is about bravery, speaking truth to power, and holding everyone in power accountable. And these are resources outside of our own. Whatever resources they have, the government, etc., these are people in the position who are more likely to use every single power they have to muzzle not only press freedom but free speech.
I'd like to expound further. Just a bit, konting dagdag na lang. Also, this is actually for the individual journalists, no? For the working hacks, kumbaga, the soldiers in the trenches. No? Because we tend to look at media as a humongous entity. We're not. There is media, the industry, and there is us. And believe me, we should not expect the industry to stand up for us. Because industry is there for profit. In the end, it will depend on us, me, kayo, individually. Are we, individual journalists, ready to, ready to face everything and ready to risk everything for what we do? Because that is exactly what happened during the dictatorship, during Marcos. They controlled the press, fine, but they didn't control the journalists. And this should be our mantra. You may control the industry, but you do not control us. We have an obligation to the truth.
Okay, but will media ownership have a hand in this exercise of freedom? Because while we may be fighting for press freedom, the network owners and the publishers may not be on our side. Ariel? Yes.
Well, to some extent, just to be fair about it, Melo, there are certain news media organizations that still, for the moment, exercise editorial independence. In other words, they allow the gatekeepers of information as well as the journalists and media workers to do their respective work. But Nonoy is correct in saying that the industry in general inherently aspire for what? Profit orientation, as well as there are certain political interests that should also be at play here. I'm sure you're aware that there are certain news media organizations that operate at a loss, but they are still there because they serve certain ends of, the owners who may have certain political ambitions for the next election. Actually, there's an interesting study before that, just to digress a bit. that you see the sprouting of various community publications, 1 year or 2 years prior to any election. Because that's the time where they try to use the role of the media to, deodorize themselves.
Yeah.
Having said that, okay, I'm sorry. Having said that, what is necessary right now is to ensure that, the journalists should stand their ground, as correctly noted by Nonoy. But as a journalism educator, I would like to expand that further. It is imperative for journalism educators to convince journalism and mass communication students to join the ranks of the protesting journalists and media workers right now, which was what happened last Friday. Albeit there were only a few university students who were there. But we do expect, what's next? We do expect universities, students themselves to take the initiative, to really get themselves involved, because the regime of press freedom will benefit them eventually. And if the students of mass communication, particularly journalism, would allow this particular situation to continue and to even worsen, then what's going to happen to them if and when they graduate and they become journalists? So that's why they have to take the fight directly to Malacanang in consonance with the other journalists and media workers. We take the fight directly to Malacanang. Call on Harry Roque for deciding to make a 180-degree turn regarding his, principles with regard to press freedom. He says that he has nothing to prove in reaction to the call for him to resign. It's true, he has nothing to prove as far as his track record is concerned. But he has a lot of explaining to do with what's happening at present, and he needs to be accountable as to what will happen with regard to his future, to his political future.
All right. Yes.
Yes, I have another question for the academe because I want to hear the view of someone outside looking in. So you guys discussed earlier the threats from the threats against media workers from the public. So what do you think led to this situation wherein even the public has a negative perception of the media? And is this something that is cyclical, that like it happens every few decades when a populist leader comes along, or can you explain, sir?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, the negative perception about media, particularly the dominant media, if we want to be specific, has been there since time immemorial because inherently the dominant media operates like a corporation. It's profit-oriented. And sometimes it's profit first, ethics second. Or sometimes it becomes last if it's at all ignored. And sometimes there is just simply token representation of, the use of journalism. Some people would say that good journalism is good business. Okay? That can be valid to some extent, but the running joke in media is that sensationalism and infotainment make for better business. So that's partly the fault of media. And the media should be called out for that every now and then. That's what we call constructive criticism. However, the situation is exacerbated under the Duterte administration through employing what we call an army of trolls. Okay? Either employing or allowing the army of trolls to help control the narrative through social media. So that's why if there is overwhelming cyberbullying in social media, we don't immediately conclude that that is the sentiment of the Filipino people or that majority of people are trolls who do troll-like behaviors, because it's just simply a certain army doing, the trolling, the cyberbullying. It could be one person controlling 100 accounts. There are case studies of that. So we have to also call out the Duterte administration for allowing trolls to, for facilitating the trolls in terms of controlling the narrative, and this is very important, hiring trolls themselves, purveyors of fake news, and then giving them government positions dahil daw sa utang na loob or as a debt of gratitude for helping during the elections. Even grammatically challenged assistant secretaries end up in government. So that's the problem right now, because you have that particular situation where inherently you have already problems with the dominant media. We have to accept that. because there are certain shortcomings given the corporate structure and the profit-oriented ways by which management of the media is being done. But at the same time, this government exacerbates the situation by not engaging in constructive criticism, but by doing destructive criticism through the trolls and even the government officials themselves when they become purveyors of fake news themselves.
Okay. You know, I heard about grammatically challenged. Well, somebody said there's someone in government who is cosmetically challenged. I read an article about that some time ago. But anyway, do we have more questions? We have a follow-up? Because I'd like to ask our panelists, in the provinces, there are small stations owned by either politicians or businessmen or those involved in illegal activities for their interests to be protected. You also have black timers as well. How do you look at this very briefly, though, because we have a group of colleagues.
Speaking as a provincial journalist, I started out in the province really. And I'm back in the provinces actually. NUJP takes a more liberal attitude towards journalists. You know, it's a job. Some of these black timers are out of work journalists who were hired. And you cannot blame a person for wanting to work. We all need a living. The problem is, you correctly pointed out, politicians own stations or buy programs, and there's no law that prevents them from doing that. And the problem is, of course, when they actually order their people to commit unethical acts, which is more the norm than the exception. And well, I remember one time we were discussing, and there was this congressman, a former congressman now. He was saying, you know, the reason you journalists are being killed is because a lot of you are so corrupt. And I could not help myself. I said, look, Congressman, sir, if corruption was a justification for murder, why are so many of you still alive? You know, I mean, you can come up with all sorts of reasons. There is no reason to silence anyone, not a single reason to silence anyone at all. And the problem with, controlling this lack of ethics, well, the industry will just have to step up. KBP should be policing its ranks. PPI should be policing its ranks. Because I remember there was one congressman from a nearby province who actually came out with his own newspaper attacking himself so he'd get more in the news. And he actually boasted about it during one of our hearings sa Congress. So, you know, it's funny, but there's no law that prevents them from doing that.
Yes, and that is the problem. The joke is on us. Yes, Ariel.
Actually, pareho kami media organization. By membership lang yung difference. While NUJP, individual journalists ng membership, it's the paper that's a member of the PPI, but we're doing a lot more programs outside Metro Manila. And in our usual training programs and roundtable discussions, interaction with them, we see a lot of problematic areas.
Okay.
Not only about ethics or in ethics, but I think most of these journals outside Metro Manila, and we see a differing landscape between Metro Manila and outside Metro Manila. They're economically challenged.
Okay.
But it doesn't justify what an ethical practice or practices they have, that they should be burned or even booted out of their regular jobs. In the first place, most of these journalists do not have regular employment. So whatever they get out of, let's say, for example, covering or even selling newspapers for that matter, marketing the newspaper for that matter, which a lot of the publishers and owners allow, which should not supposed to be the case, and
Yes.
it's been done in the provinces or in the regions. And
Yeah.
it's a sad state of not only because our colleagues in the provinces have been doing a lot of the challenging work that most of the journalists in Metro Manila do. Like, for example, when they cover hotspot areas, conflict areas, covering conflict-ridden Marawi, etc., etc. And these are really challenging
Okay.
jobs,
I know.
assignments, right?
Yes. In a paper I presented to NUJP some years ago, a foreign correspondent, like some of our colleagues, a month's salary would be more than a year's salary of a provincial correspondent. Because my friend Mok Alsaga would know that in Bicol, there are reporters who thrive on ang balitang ito ay hatid sa inyo sa kagandahang loob ng punerarya so and so. You know? That's how provincial journalists thrive. Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Rafael Bosano po from ABS-CBN News. I just want to ask Professor Araw, you were there last Friday and during the Black Friday protest. Are you seeing a significant unity amongst journalists, or do you still see a lack of it? Because just last week there was apparently a radio program who lampooned another station because saying that they were next. So are you seeing the unity amongst journalists to actually fight this?
Let's be objective and let's be blunt about it. The competition is still there, okay, business-wise. So nothing can change that. But as far as the unity is concerned, I think it's pretty significant, not just in terms of the turnout. I was expecting just a few people at the Black Friday protest at Scout Jamboree. Perhaps Donoy can explain what happened in Bacolod because he was there also, because this was a simultaneous activity. But what I'm seeing here is a sustained movement. So the challenge now is what kind of campaign programs will you be doing that would encourage as much warm bodies as possible and as much higher level of discourse as possible. Because when Duterte engages in crass language, we cannot afford to stoop to his level. If he uses, for example, PI to, degrade us, we have to also say, fact you, in calling him out. Remember, a fact, F-A-C-T, not the other F word. Because it's all about us as purveyors of the truth. The truth, it's very unthinkable. Why, in the academe, for example, why are we debating on truth right now when it is supposed to be basic? When we debate, it's supposed to be different interpretations of the truth. But right now, the dichotomy is very clear. Truth on one hand, lies on the other. And it appears, based on approval ratings right now, that lies are getting the upper hand. Why? Because Duterte apparently gets the playbook from Goebbels. What did Goebbels say during the Third Reich? Repeat a lie 100 times, it becomes the truth. So that's one formula in terms of the troll army that's being, spread through social media. So right now, what do? We close our ranks, we close in, and last Friday, I remember saying that the youth, particularly those students in journalism and mass communication, would play a vital role. No offense meant to the journalists because they're just quite a few in terms of numbers. And sometimes when journalists are there, they prefer not to join the protest but to cover, which is also understandable, by the way. I mean, there's no offense meant there. Okay? But the students, okay, they will be there to lend their voice, to lend their warm bodies to the protest. So that's why we have to call out and we have to continue organizing and immersing in various universities, particularly those offering journalism and mass communication, so that we can encourage the students, the teachers, but I'm more biased for the students, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of enlightening them and, putting their idealism to good use. So I think that's what's in store. And while I'm not one of the organizers of the Black Friday protest movement, what you can expect is that hopefully the organizers would bring the campaign also to various universities, just like what happened during the Ampatuan massacre way back in 2009 and in the years forward, because that's what they learned. I'm sorry to hug the microphone, but I hope Nonoy can also share what happened last Friday sa Bacolod. Okay ba? Sorry.
The Bacolod media has been pretty much an activist, activist streak. We've been very active ever since issues of press freedom. But it was very encouraging that this time, I think it was the biggest mobilization of media in Negros. And this time there were so many young colleagues, which was very, very encouraging. And I think that should be the norm. We hope to see more of that, not just in Manila, in Bacolod, but all over the country.
Yeah, because there are
Yeah.
pockets of protest.
Yes, there are pockets of protest.
Elsewhere in the country, there.
Okay.
That's why you cannot judge the protest.
Microphone, please.
You could not judge the protests, plural, by their sheer numbers. In the first place, there are not too many journalists who have joined the protest because some of them as a newsroom. I mean, you can't take them out from their jobs. And as Prof. Danny said, those who came or those who attended, probably they were covering it. Exactly. And I did say this openly on my Facebook account because there are not too many journalists in this country. And I mean journalists.
Okay. I remember during my college days, and that was a long, long time ago, whenever Mr. Marcos would have his referendum, the college editors would sponsor debates. I brought one to Lucena City with then Charito Planas, may she rest in peace, against the governor of Quezon Province. And boy, it was a great debate because Charito said, referendum? That's a lot of nonsense. And Pugo was someone to reckon with. Yes, please.
Good morning, sir. I'm Toru Morinaga from the Daily Mania Shimbun. Sir, it may be a basic question, but do you think their way of funding of Rappler using PDRs is a violation of their current constitution? If so, how should they get money from their foreign countries?
Any volunteer? You read the decision, right?
Actually, they also read. They're just a bit humble about it. But nevertheless, excuse me. Okay, doesn't it? Well, if you read the SEC decision, of course, definitely the long and short of it was that Rappler violated the law. So therefore, they should close down. But as mentioned a while ago, PDRs are just simply financial instruments so that foreigners would have the opportunity to infuse money into certain industries. What is a bit complicated about media is that it is in the negative list of the Foreign Investments Act of 1991. What do we mean by negative list? No foreign investors are allowed there. But by investments, we're talking about investments as part owners or shares in the stock market for publicly listed corporations. PDRs, by tradition, at least the way it's done here in the Philippines, the depositary receipts, it's a norm for certain corporations to allow foreign money to come in, and then that's it. But there is a clear stipulation in PDRs that PDRs do not translate to shares of stock. So it doesn't mean part ownership. But the problem with OMIDR has to do with the prior good faith proviso, because the SEC argues that it's not anymore just simply a PDR investment. They said that it is what we call an equity investment. Equity in the sense that you get a certain percentage of shares of stock. That's how they interpreted it. But it doesn't make sense. Because if you look at the articles of incorporation and the other SEC papers of Rappler, what's stated there is that it is 98% owned by RHC or the Rappler Holdings Corporation, and the other, percentages would be, the remaining shares would be owned by the likes of Maria Ressa, Chay Hofilenia, and some other personalities who may be involved in business but not journalism, because I haven't heard of them. So most probably they're into business who decided to invest. But they are Filipino sounding. So I suppose that all of those listed as owners of Rappler or those who get the shares of stock are Filipinos. The SEC, surprisingly, is silent, in saying that, if you consider OMIDR shares as equity investment, what is the percentage of shares that it has on Rappler? It has nothing there. There's nothing in the SEC decision that would just simply put what percentage of control, quote unquote, that it has on Rappler, which is a bit weird because they just simply made a conclusion based on their own interpretation, and they say that this is our opinion, live with it, so you're closed down. So that's why the direct answer to your question is the SEC thinks that that Rappler violated the law. Our contention is there may be legitimate questions on the case of the Omidyar shares as to why there is prior good faith discussion, but the punishment doesn't fit the crime. That would explain why we say if there was a crime in the first, yes. Thank you for pointing that out. If there was a crime in the first place. That's why we say, based on our interpretation of the normative standards of journalism and the circumstantial evidence that would point to the continual harassment of Rappler by Duterte himself, that this is clearly an assault on press freedom. We don't just depend on the legalities compared to what a certain media group would argue, that it's just simply complying with the law. That's so narrow-minded. It's not just simply an interpretation of the law, but understanding clearly the normative standards of journalism and understanding firmly the recent history that Rappler is going through right now.
Okay. Yes, please.
Hello, sir. Mai Bermudez from UNTV News and Rescue. Sir, question for everyone.
Although I thought you were a practicum.
Sir, 1 year na rin ako halos. Anyway, sir, there are individuals who are challenging business entities like media organizations have this business nature, di ba, sir? So, do media organizations have a responsibility to explain to people their investors, their PDRs? Your comments, sir.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I said this a while ago, we have to be forthcoming. If we want to be sort of responsible by our own terms, accountable, transparent, we owe it to the public. We should not be keeping anything from the public because in the first place, we keep on criticizing other people, even the government. So if we get to be criticized only because we allow ourselves to, to wallow in our whatever,
Okay.
we have to be forthcoming.
Yes, please.
Definitely, I think transparency is a rule that we should abide by. And not only that, not just be transparent about who owns media. I think we ourselves, the journalists, should be transparent about our work processes. How do we gather the news? How do we make the news? Because this is the only way to make people understand that what they're reading, what they're seeing, what they're hearing is actually the product of a painstaking process of fact vetting. We do not invent the facts. So for anyone to accuse us of being fake news, they'll have to prove it first. Because everything we do undergoes vetting. So we should be transparent about that also to avoid any suspicions about what we do.
I've always believed in the tenet that I'd rather be scooped than denied. Okay? Kayo na mauna, wag lang ako tatanggihan ng news source ko. Follow up? Okay? Pat, I saw you standing a while ago. You have questions? Yes, please.
Isa lang. Sir, Tribune, Pat Santos, sir.
Yes, please.
We suffered the same fate nung panahon ni Gloria. As you mentioned a while ago. Sir, you said a while ago, one of you guys said, the SEC allowed it. That's why Rappler goes on business. Do they have accountability for allowing Rappler to go on business? Meron bang administratively, did they, as officials of and they keep on renewing the business permit?
Actually, that's a good point because, in relation to what was asked by our UNTV reporter over here, the public disclosure of Rappler Holdings Incorporated as regards the PDRs of Omidyar and North Base, these were made as early as 2016 when they received the PDRs itself. And then, even the SEC admits receiving the PDRs. And they did not question at that particular time the controversial provision in the case of Omidyar about prior good faith discussion. Dapat doon pa lang may tanong na. Pero wala. What did the SEC do that gave rise to this decision? They acted on the complaint by the Solicitor General. That's what they did. They acted on the complaint of the Solicitor General. And apparently, they looked at the Solicitor General's complaint as basically marching orders to, crack the whip on Rappler because
Okay.
as you know, since day one of the Duterte presidency, it's been very critical of Rappler.
Okay,
Ganun.
now let me ask you. You may refuse to answer anyway.
Apa.
Do you think this is in a way strange for the Solicitor General to initiate such an action by the SEC?
Wonderful question, and I agree to answer. Because it's like this, what is the job of a Solicitor General? Basically, if we want to be fundamental about it, it is supposed to act as something like a government legal counsel and not to interfere with the operations, most especially of the media. If Duterte would have wanted to be creative, it should have taken a private citizen, someone like you and me, to file the complaint to the SEC to ask, napansin ko po sa public declaration ng Rappler, parang may mali po yata, baka pwede pong tingnan ninyo. But what happened? The Solicitor General himself. So that's why we tend to interpret it as something like marching orders because what is the business of the Solicitor General in terms of interfering with the internal operations of Rappler, even if these internal operations are publicly declared? Bakit siya? Yun yung isa sa mga bagay na dapat nating itanong.
So, para din ganun yung nangyari dun sa frigate? Dahil mula yung dokumento kay Mr. Bongo papunta kay Secretary Lorenzana? As a media man, how do you look at it? Media man ka eh. Tingin mo lang.
May smoking gun naman, di ba?
May smoking
May
gun.
smoking gun naman yun eh.
Okay.
May marginal note eh. I
May
think that marginal note speaks for itself. You cannot refute the note eh. That this came from, please. Di ba?
Okay. So ito, nagkataon yung Solicitor General ang nagreklamo.
Bakit
sa SEC.
siya? Diba?
Bakit siya? So, Ariel, ikaw pinakabata rito, you find it amateur? Because sabi ni Professor, dapat sana iba man lang. No?
Hindi,
Mikropono.
Suspicious, di ba? It could have done it. So in last administration, I think they're just waiting for the right time.
Okay.
And the right time is now.
Okay. All right. Yes, please.
Basic Cabrera po sa Hataw. Basically, I believe in two things. When somebody hits you, when you hit somebody, most probably that person would hit back by whatever means. And secondly, naniniwala din ako na better safe than sorry. Now, kasi nung nangyari ho sa akin yan, may binanatan ako na kapwa-comedian because of corrupt practices. But I made it sure na wala siyang mababanat sa akin. Diba? Diba? So what I'm saying is, kung sinunod ng Raptor, alam naman nila kung alin yung mali at tama, di ba? Kasi we're purveyors of the truth. So kung meron problema yung business ko, ayusin ko muna bago ako bumanat. So anong reaction niyo po doon?
Hindi, madali lang to. And Raptor did comply with the other requirements of SEC when, according to Maria, and nasa news naman yan, when they were called out for some supposedly violations early on, yun na, 2016, 17, they complied actually. They actually complied.
So saan nanggagaling ang problema nila ngayon?
Hindi, may utos na eh. Dahil yung Solicitor General
pero
nga
kung walang,
nagsabi.
di ba, what I'm saying is, kung walang masisilip sa'yo,
Hindi, kaya nga eh.
whatever,
Kaya nga sinasabi nga ni Professor, kung iba ang nag-complain, hindi maituturo na may utos. Solicitor General yung nagtanong eh.
Can I just let's rephrase it. What if Rappler was that critical of the administration? What if Rappler was that critical of the president? Do you think it would merit any attention from SEC?
Obviously not.
Ayun. So, yun na. That's the answer. Okay. Very good, very good. Thank you very much for asking the question. Meron pa? Yes, please.
Yes, I have a question about the use of PDRs. Because earlier you mentioned that you were against foreign ownership. But but on the use of PDRs, do you see anything fundamentally wrong with the use of it? Because from a certain point of view, it does seem like a gateway to foreign ownership. Like, for example, on paper, you wouldn't, the investor would only have rights to the dividends or the profits. But at any point in time, if if the media organization does something, he can withdraw investments from the media organization. So it does seem like some degree of control or ownership.
Yeah, we can even argue that PDRs would serve as indirect control by, yun na nga, the power to pull out your whatever amount you've provided. Yes, do I see something wrong with PDRs? Yes. And it is rooted in the fact that there is something fundamentally wrong when you operate a media organization as a corporation. There's nothing wrong with PDRs perhaps in other industries where you try to infuse as much capital as possible. But for media, it's not supposed to be profit-oriented generally. It's supposed to be service-oriented because because your duty is to help in the shaping of public opinion, not to accumulate wealth or as much as possible. That's why it would be beneficial for the dominant media as early as this time to reflect not just on the use of PDR, but on how it functions as a corporation. Dun po yung nagiging problema. Now, of course, okay, let's focus on Rappler. I have questions, definitely, as to why among the many foreigners who may be interested in Rappler, bakit pinili niya yung Omidyar tsaka yung North Base? That's one question. The second question would have to do with why is there a special provision for Omidyar on prior good faith discussion? Okay, these are questions. Now, Maria, to be fair, tried her best to answer all of these questions. Okay? Are we satisfied? Well, that would depend on how you view, how in-depth her explanation is. But what cannot be denied is that Rappler is still profit-oriented. Okay? Now, it's a business, exactly. Now, that's the context. Now, the decision of the SEC is this. Allegedly, you erred in, issuing the PDR, especially in the case of Omidyar. Okay? It's groundbreaking. Anyway, especially in the case of Omidyar, but there was an alleged error, but does the punishment fit the crime?
Okay.
Okay? Does the punishment fit the crime? That much we have to emphasize. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. Now, let me ask you guys, excuse me, pasensya na po kayo, medyo nagkaroon lang ng konting technical glitch. Actually, ngayon lang nangyari yun eh. Dito, sa Aristocrat.
Kasi yung issue,
bigat.
Mabigat ang
Mabigat
issue.
yung issue eh. Bihira yun ah. Now, let me ask you guys, gentlemen. There are other networks who are in cooperative arrangements with foreign entities. Now, let's be candid about it. CNN Philippines. May mga programa na Amerikano. Paano yun? Paano yung sistema? Will it not in a way infringe doon sa ating mga batas sa Pilipinas?
I'm not really sure about CNN, but I think it's a franchise agreement ata.
Franchise agreement. So how will it impact on Philippine laws?
But that they exist means they're legal. Diba? And in fairness naman, CNN comes up with its own content. It produces its own content.
Okay.
Which is, of course, Whether you agree with the content or not, that's another thing. As for the other networks having PDRs, yun nga, I agree with Danny. It's what may be legal may not be right. At bottom line,
Yes.
But yun nga, the problem is they allow it. The law allows it. So if it's allowable under the law, why change? Kumbaga, di ba? Why change horses in midstream? Why change the rules in midstream?
Okay.
So it's also unfair to the business. Although I may not agree with these kinds of arrangement, it's the same way like how do foreigners circumvent ownership like sa resorts? They marry Filipinas. Di ba? So technically, the Filipinas own the resort. But who controls the resort?
The foreigner.
The foreigner, of course. So,
Pero kung
it
Filipina
could
yung
it could
asawa,
give way.
mas kawawa yung foreigner.
Yun lang. Buong pamilya.
Di ba? Napapag-usapan lang naman to. Theoretically. Okay. Good. Last two questions. We cannot afford to have lunch today. Nobody will be gallant enough to sponsor the lunch.
Yes, from the press groups, you mentioned that press freedom in the Philippines is under threat. But on the whole of the ASEAN region, do you see this wave as happening also in other ASEAN countries with similar style leadership like Duterte?
Actually, yes, it's actually becoming increasingly repressive throughout the region. We see this in Myanmar under the Nobel Peace Laureate Aung San Suu Kyi. They're arresting journalists there. In Cambodia, they're cracking down also. They shut down the only English language newspaper. And in Thailand, of course, it's a junta. Malaysia, except I guess for Malaysia Kini and one or two very small regional outfits like the one in Sarawak, there is really no independent media to speak of in Malaysia. It's basically controlled by government allies, business and political interests. So yeah, press freedom is actually under threat throughout the region. In fact, that was the consensus. NUJP belongs to the Southeast Asian Journalists Unions, which counts media unions across the region. And it is the consensus of everyone that yes, we are facing very, very difficult times.
What about Indonesia?
Indonesia is actually better off at this point because they have a very, very good, a very independent journalist association, AJI. It's very, very fiercely independent.
So the Indonesian counterpart of National Press Club?
No, NUJP.
Okay. NUJP. Okay. Yel.
Yung threat naman kasi is an everyday occurrence. It happens to every single journalist, whether you're covering in Metro Manila, outside Metro Manila, most especially when you're covering conflict-ridden areas. It's not as if it did happen before, yesterday, or it's not going to happen in the next 5 minutes. There's always threat. And the chilling effect is tantamount to the threat itself. So when you're worried about writing critically and that you think you'll be suppressed, and that somebody can call you out for it, any government official, then I think that's a threat in itself because you cannot write another story where you think about all these factors and when you think you're threatened.
Okay. Professor.
Mabilis lang po. In terms of level of comparison, while we belong to the same region, in terms of global impunity indices, we are comparable only to the following: Iraq, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, to some extent Mexico. Why? Because of the rampant killings of journalists. I'm not saying that other ASEAN countries, member countries, are better off because there are fewer journalists there. It's just that the other ASEAN member countries have certain laws like lèse majesté or sa Thailand and others, and the constitutional provision in Cambodia that the king shall be inviolable. So, hindi mo talaga pwedeng tirahin yung hari. Pwede yung mga prime ministers but not the royal family. I think the same case with Thailand. So, we are comparable only to those that are war-torn, mainly those who are war-torn countries, those who are engaged in internal civil strife. Singapore, for example, it's very repressive in terms of harassment and intimidation of journalists, but wala pang masyadong, ngayon, there's no journalists yet killed in Singapore. The worst that can happen is that you get expelled or you get ostracized from Singapore.
Or you
That's
get
about
to
it.
be declared persona non grata.
Yon, persona non grata.
Okay.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay, let's look forward. Final statements. Yung bang mga graduate ninyo, nasaan na sila? At yung bang mga gagraduate ngayon, would rather be in PR or showbiz rather than in mainstream media?
You know, that's the dilemma in journalism education right now. You encourage students to do well in the journalism profession or to even go to the communities to strengthen the community press, but you end up, putting them in danger. Because if you do a good job as a journalist and if you end up in the communities, for example, most of the journalists killed are in the communities, in the part of the community press. Majority are radio journalists. So that's the problem. So we can only go to the extent of saying that you have to do a good job as a journalist, but you have to remember there are certain dangers to the profession. I have to admit, Melo, and to our fellow journalists here, that there are people who would engage in journalism, but their perspective is to just go into what we call the lipstick bit or the soft bit, like fashion, entertainment, lifestyle, etc. Because wellness, etc. Because it's relatively, quote-unquote, safer. Okay? The most that can happen to you is that you get sued for libel for whatever it is that you've written. That's the worst that can happen. Wala pang entertainment journalist na pinapatay sa pagkakaalam ko. But
Baka nasampal, meron na.
ayun, meron na. Oo, meron na siguro. But the problem, so that's the dilemma in journalism education right now. So what's gonna happen to them? We hope that through the Black Friday protest, if we're able to really sustain it, the journalists and the media industry itself could help encourage our students to be more involved socially and politically because that's what the country needs right now.
Thank you. From PPI, ano nakikita nyo in the near future?
I wanted to say another thing.
Please.
Anyway, very promising. While we do not...
Just like politicians,
I know.
very promising.
No, but I see, you've got mentors like Professor Arau and all these teachers, educators, etc. There's hope. And I think that kind of orientation that we actually need from future journalists should be there. Because we have well-meaning journalists, practitioners themselves. And may I just say this last parting statement. Press freedom should not be under the mercy or should not be beholden to any government. Sans is constitutionally enshrined, it exists because it insists.
To be honest about it, whenever I'm invited to speak before campus journalists or student bodies, the first thing I always say is, "Huwag kayong pumasok dito." No, it's both a warning and a challenge actually. I mean it as a challenge also as much as a warning. Because I never pull punches when I talk to the kids, to the youth. I tell them of the dangers because it is a dangerous job. But I also tell them that it's a job that once it gets into you, it's a job that you'll never turn your back on, and it's a job that you'll always carry with pride. So it's a thankless job, but it's a great job. Personally, I never wanted to be a journalist until I had to find a job that would feed my body. And it was the only thing I knew to do, right? And eventually, it grows on you. This job grows on you. I don't think anyone actually comes into journalism like, well, yeah, there are eager beavers, and these are often the ones who drop out early. The ones who stay on, I'd like to believe, are the ones who actually had to struggle with the job and themselves. Because this is a thankless job na eh. And once you realize that and overcome it and soldier on despite everything, then you're in it for life. So ako, naniniwala ako, in Bacolod, it was proof, our Black Friday protest, siguro, more than half of the journalists there were, no, journalists, more than half were in their mid-30s and younger. So that's a very, very encouraging sign. And I'd like to believe it's the same thing is happening in other major centers, and I hope even in the smaller communities. So as long as we stick to that, as long as we believe that we are free because we insist on being free, I don't think no government will ever silence us.
Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to end our discussion this morning with two quotes. And these quotes are very simple. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And another quote is, the time is always right to do what is right. And the quotes come from Martin Luther King Jr. With that, we say thank you for being with us. It's indeed a pleasure to having had discussions with our colleagues and interactions with our colleagues from the media. Next week, we hope to talk about the banking industry. I'm just waiting for the confirmation. So, hindi po kasama sa pag-uusapan yung bangko ng waiting. So, thank you very much. Have a nice time.